Hey everybody, welcome to another review. Today I'll be covering Elektra Assassin, written by Frank Miller and illustrated by Bill Sienkiewicz. Um, this is, I don't want to say it's a Daredevil spin-off. I mean, Elektra is a main, one of the, supporting characters in Frank Miller's Daredevil run. She was introduced by Miller. And this is kind of like a, standalone story following one of her adventures. And I'm going to start right off by saying this is absolutely bananas. And I mean, I'm sure you can see just by the illustrations alone, um, it's wild. Sienkiewicz's art really lends a lot to this volume because it's very exaggerated, much like the writing style. Um, some of the characters retain like the same facial expressions throughout the entire book, which I think is really funny. But make no mistake, this book is a satire. So it's like there are major elements of political satire all throughout this book. And that's something I wasn't really expecting, but um, I liked most of that in this book. Um, I think the writing style especially is very much it feels like Frank Miller. Um, he has this way of writing, especially in his more his more dark stuff. And this is definitely one of his darker books. He has a way of writing that's almost like it's exaggerated, but it also feels very uh, psychological as well. And this, I think, is his most psychological work yet that I've read, aside from maybe Ronin. Um, this book reminds me a lot of um, some of like Dave McKean's work. I think I mentioned that when talking about Sienkiewicz's art in one of my other videos. But Bill Sienkiewicz, the way he draws things, it reminds me a lot of Dave McKean's art style. Um, and this book in particular reminded me a lot of a book that McKean worked on with Neil Gaiman called Black Orchid. This book reminded me a lot of that book because its subject matter, it deals a lot with like psychological kind of stuff. It deals with kind of the things that are going on in Elektra's head, and also how she uses her abilities to manipulate other people. And there's a lot of really cool stuff in here regarding how she um, holds like mental power over people, um, and kind of struggles to grapple with her own abilities. So it's interesting in that regard, kind of seeing how Elektra deals with things. In this particular story, she is targeting a bunch of people because she believes that they've been possessed by this entity called the Beast, and so she's going after all these political candidates and people who were possessed by this like demon entity that she was introduced to when she used to train to become a ninja. And so she's hunting down all these people that she thinks are possessed by the beast, and she employs a former agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. Named John Garrett, who at first is an enemy to her, but once she gains like mental power over him, he kind of helps her out. Um, and that's the thing about this book. John Garrett is not a good person in this book, and a lot of the characters are not good people, but that's kind of the point, because this book, like I said, is it deals a lot with like political satire, and it kind of takes shots at like um, different ideas and like corporations and stuff. And it does so in a way that worked for me most of the time, but there are other moments where it didn't quite work for me. Um, One other thing I will say about this book is the action scenes are incredible. And some of the best stuff is the stuff that you don't see. There's a scene from the second chapter of this book that I think is brilliant, but it's all told to you, and it's just a bunch of like black panels, and you get like narration from one of the characters, and it's just like right here, just a bunch of black panels, and the character is narrating kind of what he's like hearing and like smelling and like feeling in a completely dark room, and through his narration you get an idea of what's happening, and it's stuff like that that really kind of blows my mind when it comes to the way this book is written. As far as flaws go, it's kind of a common trait for a lot of Frank Miller's work, where he almost goes a little too over the top at some points, in terms of like repeating phrases over and over again, and that just gets kind of annoying sometimes. And that's another thing that as Frank Miller went on in his career, that's something he did more and more, was like he would have the same phrase on a page like 7 times, and it's like, okay, we get that it's important, but it's also like, do you really have to repeat like the same thing like 7 different times in a row? And I mean, that's a common element in his work, so I kind of overlook it, but like he kind of uses repetition as a way to really hammer home the point, and sometimes it feels a little too on the nose. Other than that, though, I mean, this is one of the cooler Marvel comics I've read in a long time. I don't know. I mean, it's a totally different vibe from Frank Miller's run on Daredevil back in the 80s. But it's still fantastic. I think Elektra Assassin is a really cool story with fantastic art. And I'll also say it has an ending that I think is really clever. Kind of threw me for a loop, but this whole book is really, really clever. So if you like, superhero stories that are really like psychological, get you to think a lot, and have more than a fair dose of political satire, I would totally recommend this book. I think it's got a cool kind of edge to it. Not perfect by any means, but it's definitely a product of its time. But there are also elements of it that kind of ring true today as well. I wouldn't, in terms of its satire, I wouldn't compare it to like Transmetropolitan. I think that does political satire better than this book does, and I even think that The Dark Knight Returns, also by Frank Miller, uses political satire better than this book does, but it still made me chuckle on a number of occasions, and it still made me think about like current things that are going on, like our political climate and stuff, and there are similarities between this book and that as well. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, I would check it out. As always, thank you for watching, and have a great night.